Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President.
The State of the Union, a moment when the president speaks directly to the heart of the nation, outlining the country's goals and agenda for the next year.
And you were also invited to the State of the Union most recently?
Yes, so we jumped at the chance. Now, little did we know at the time that it was between us and Caitlin Clark.
Today's guests on Grieving Out Loud were invited to the 2024 State of the Union for a reason they could have never imagined just a few years ago.
Were you aware of fentanyl?
No, it caught us off guard. And when we found our son, that was one of the first things they said to us, and I didn't really have any idea what they were talking about.
I'm your host, Angela Kennecke. Join me at the Midwest DEA Family Summit as we confront the mental health crisis, the fentanyl epidemic, and hear how this family is turning their unimaginable grief into a mission to save lives.
Well, Kathy and Deric, it is just great to meet you here in person at the DEA Family Fentanyl Summit. I have been going to this summit this is my third one, and every year it grows. Sadly, every year there are more parents like us, and I know that you've suffered this horrible tragedy, just like so many of us, and I'm sorry we meet under these circumstances, but I am glad to know you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
And thanks for having us.
I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about what happened in your family, what happened with your son, Sebastian. Can you tell me a little bit about Sebastian? What was he like?
He was, I guess, your typical teenager. He was funny. He enjoyed spending time with his friends. He was a hard worker. He loved sports, loved fishing, hunting, just loved being active. And he was a handful at times, but he was a good kid. He had a big heart, and that's one of our favorite things about him. But he was very respectful, but I would say he was typical.
A typical kid who loved the outdoors and had a passion for creating music. Deric and Kathy also say their teenage son was especially talented when it came to technology, even running that aspect of the family's tree removal business.
Could do just about anything. He took the reins and just did a tremendous job. So he's one of those people that could have done anything.
And he was like 16 or something, and he was doing this?
At the end of his 16th year into his 17th, he was basically running most of the equipment and taking care of things. And my little salesman out there, talking to the clients, he was just very good with people.
Yeah, he was a good little salesman.
Did you ever worry about him? Were you concerned about him?
You always worry. You always worry. I think his personality was so big. He never met a stranger. He was always just talking to people, very out there, always wanting to try new things. I don't know that we worried about him any more so than any parent would worry about any kid, really.
We raised him to be very independent. He would go anywhere by himself. He would make friends in a matter of seconds. It didn't matter who they were. He just wanted to be friends with everybody. He wanted to talk to everybody, and I could not go anywhere with that kid without somebody coming up to him.
We would be at the weirdest places. Was at the Omaha Zoo, and he ran into people he knew. I mean, we couldn't go into Hy-Vee. We couldn't go anywhere without him meeting people, and we had no idea who they were. But he knew the kids, he knew the parents.
You're saying he's an extrovert then?
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
He was raised that way.
Right.
Well, and that's just sort of natural too. Some kids are extroverts, some kids are introverts. And I think also somebody who is very outgoing, not afraid to try new things, not afraid to go to different places, meet new people. My daughter was completely like that.
Yeah.
She was an extrovert and she was a risk taker.
Mm-hmm.
I always say she was a gymnast and she was on the balance beam and
Oh,
takes more
yeah.
risks than that, right?
Right.
I don't know if Sebastian was a risk taker, if he's tried new things. And
I have video of him cliff diving and doing some other things, so I would say yes.
Yes.
Cliff diving. Okay. Yes,
Yes.
definitely. I think the thing is, there are personality traits that contribute to what's happening in today's world. And sadly, it shouldn't be that way. But there certainly are. If kids are risk takers, they're more than willing to try something.
Mm-hmm. And they think they're invincible.
And we all did at that age.
Right.
Of all the challenges kids face, Deric and Kathy never really worried about drugs. After all, they were a family that rarely drank and didn't even keep alcohol in the house.
We definitely did not talk in a positive manner about recreational drugs. They knew our opinion on things, and it was just no all the way through. So
Yeah. I mean, we were social drinkers, usually only on vacation. So the kids didn't see it, on a day-to-day basis. Same thing with smoking. Neither one of us smoked or anything like that. So you just have the normal conversations with them.
And were you aware of how deadly the drug supply is? Were you aware of fentanyl?
no, it caught us off guard. And when we found our son, that was one of the first things they said to us. And I didn't really have any idea what they were talking about.
Now this couple understands the devastating impact of fentanyl all too well. In July of 2021, their son had a busy day working 2 jobs and getting ready for a vacation the next day, something he was really looking forward to.
He had been planning a trip with his aunt and uncle, cross-country trip that probably for 6 months they'd been talking about it, and the day finally arrived. And he was getting ready for bed. His girlfriend had come over for about an hour, and they spent some time together, and he was showered, told us goodnight, gave me a big hug, went to bed. And, the funny thing is for some reason, I felt like I needed to check on him. I can't explain why, but I didn't. And the next morning, he was supposed to be up for work. He was still going to work his normal job before he took off, and his bedroom door was closed. And I instantly felt like something was wrong and knocked on the door. And when I opened it, he was slumped over his bed. He was on his knees on the floor and slumped over his bed. My heart dropped because I knew something was wrong, and part of me was just praying that it wasn't. I hollered at him, told him to get up, said it's time to get up, and no response. So I touched him, and, I knew right away, but I still tried to shake him. And then I screamed when he didn't move. He had been gone for hours and hours. So as you can imagine, the situation, my wife called 911, and when they arrived, they told me not to touch my son because it may be fentanyl, and they didn't want me to be around it. And, that didn't matter. I hugged my son the entire time.
First of all, the situation is a complete shock and traumatizing. And then to not even know what fentanyl is, to not even know there could be an issue, to not know that he could have tried something. Like with my daughter, we knew there was a problem, but I didn't expect her to die because I didn't know exactly what it was. You talk about finding him in his room, and you are probably the 5th or 6th parent I've talked to whose kid was at home, and they go into their room and find them dead the next day, and they're thinking they're safe at home. The brain can't even register how this could happen, when you think they're safe at home in their beds, in their bedrooms, sleeping for the night. One of those parents is Sam Chapman, whose 16-year-old son bought a pill through Snapchat that ended up being laced with a deadly amount of fentanyl. It was delivered to his house just as easily as if he'd ordered a pizza online.
I was there when he died and tried to resuscitate him and did not succeed. So that is a freak out and a half, along with all the other sorrow and pain.
Right. It's just one more thing. I almost think people who didn't get to their child's body, so to speak, have it better off. Because for me, I ran through a police barricade, to get into her apartment and saw my daughter laying on the ground where the EMTs were working on her. And that was bad enough. I mean, you were there before the EMTs. I know that in Sammy's case.
Mm-hmm.
That image is just burned into my mind, and it comes back oftentimes when I don't expect it to. Do you find that to be the case too?
Right. And in the places where I was most creative, where your mind sort of goes blank and all of those wonderful business thoughts and stuff that I did well would just come flooding in. Now images of his death and reminders that he's dead flow in. So like in the shower, when there's just white noise, all of these wonderful creative ideas used to come. And now I don't even I do still take my showers, but I don't like it because those thoughts come rushing back in the gray space.
And it's the same story every single time.
And it's just shocking and awful and horrible. And then that day, I think, is always also burned into your psyche. I also was with my daughter after she died in her room, and I, laid with her. They kind of left me alone with her until the crime lab came, which surprised me because they don't always do that when they're concerned about fentanyl. And I laid with her, and it's such a awful feeling because they're gone. And I just hugged her until I was kicked out of the room, basically. And it sounds like that's what you did as well.
I did. And that moment is etched in my brain forever. And it's a tough image to get out. Sometimes I wish I didn't have it. And it's something you can't get out of your head.
There's so much of it, I think, that is a blur. I just even was thinking the other day about the details of the funeral and just realizing that there's just so many parts and pieces of it that I don't even remember how things came together. The first, well, I guess a year, you drive down the street, you still expect to see his vehicle parked out there. You expect to come downstairs and see him at the island eating cereal in the morning, and they're not there. So for me, I just feel like a lot of that first couple years are kind of a blur.
I think that's normal. It's really like a brain injury.
Mm.
When you have such a traumatic and shocking death, you're in shock. And it really does feel like a brain injury, a brain fog. I think most of us have experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really describe the pain. I've watched a lot of interviews with people that have lost, whether it's just normal people or celebrity, and people that have lost specifically a child. And you can literally see the pain in their eyes. You can hear it in their voices when they talk about it. And we're talking years down the road. What I have found is you learn to live with it. And the more experiences you have, the easier it is to cope with it. There are certain things it took doing things that first, second, and third time for me to finally feel like, okay, I can do this. And this might be a poor example, but even listening to a song, I couldn't do it. I had to turn it off. And then I'd listen to a little more and then a little more. And I'd cry during the first few times. And eventually I got to a point to where I could get through it. And my experiences are the same with that as well. There are some things that I haven't been able to do yet. And there are some things that little by little I've been able to try to get out there. Fishing was a passion of mine with our son, and I haven't been fishing since. I'm just not there yet. But the day-to-day stuff, little by little, you just learn how to, hopefully you do. Not everybody's the same, but hopefully you learn how to cope with it and deal with it on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Everybody's grief journey is different. It's unique to them.
On top of battling their grief, Deric and Kathy were shocked to learn how their son had died. Fentanyl wasn't even on their radar. How could their child have gotten the powerful synthetic opioid?
They found the other half of the pill. I guess that he took half of what he thought was a Percocet, and they said that there was enough in there, it killed him almost instantly. So we really, unless I would have caught him right at that moment, it wouldn't have mattered. But he was taking medication for anxiety and depression, and he had at some point switched that out. We knew that he did not feel comfortable taking the medication, and we're not thrilled about medications anyway, but we also knew some of the pain that he was going through. So we, on the advice of his doctor, we went ahead and agreed to do that. And unfortunately, they didn't make him feel well. So he switched out at some point and continued on using what he thought was Percocet. And in the end, that was his demise.
The Percocet Sebastian began taking was not prescribed by a doctor. Instead, Deric says a friend suggested he start buying it off the street, or should we say through his cell phone, to cope with his anxiety and depression. Sadly, this is not uncommon. In fact, families of dozens of young people who died after buying illegal drugs through social media are now suing Snapchat's parent company.
He tried it through a friend the first time, and then he started to obtain it through Snapchat.
How do you know on the advice of a friend?
Because I spoke to that friend.
Oh, really?
That was a very difficult conversation, but
Tell me about that.
I had another one of his friends bring up a name, and I contacted her directly when I found out, and she was very open about the discussion. The funny thing is that he had had a conversation with her. He knew that it wasn't making him feel right, and he got her to stop, but he could not get away from it himself. I don't know how long he had been taking it, but it was long enough where it had a hold on him.
And chances are what he was taking was fentanyl all along,
Right.
just not enough to kill him.
Right.
Because we know these pressed pills that they're getting off of Snapchat
Mhm.
are always pretty much laced with fentanyl.
In fact, the Drug Enforcement Administration issued a public safety alert after lab testing revealed that 7 out of every 10 pills seized by the DEA contained a deadly dose of fentanyl. In 2023 alone, law enforcement confiscated more than 115 million pills laced with the potentially deadly substance. Here's Justin King in a previous episode of Grieving Out Loud. King was a special agent in charge of the DEA Omaha division.
The synthetic drug does not have a growing season. It does not have a product. They don't have to have the manual labor to do all that. And, you know, I've worked in Afghanistan in the poppy fields and eradicating that. And it's a very tedious process to produce heroin from that once you get that going. It's the same thing with marijuana growing. So anything synthetic, there's a higher profit margin, and plus they can make an unlimited supply of it.
And you just need a building to make it in.
A building, but they a lot of times will make it in the middle of a jungle, or they'll make it, you know, somewhere in a rural area, because it takes a lot of laboratories to make the products. We have seen a decline in heroin seizures significantly. There still are heroin seizures, we still do, but with the fentanyl seizures, like we said, it's a lower overhead product. They don't have to put as much money into it, and they will produce that, and their profit margins are extremely high because of it.
It's all about profit.
All about profit.
Tragically, that greed has led to a surge in deaths across the U.S. Fentanyl's high potency not only makes it deadly, but also incredibly addictive.
Well, it's very easy to get started. There are a lot of different ways. You know, our son suffered, he had broken collarbone, he had sports injuries, he was highly involved in sports. Again, he was dealing with anxiety and depression. So there's a lot of reasons why these people, whether it's kids or adults, they're put on these medications to try and help initially, and they can't get off of it. And then if they do, you know, if the prescriptions end up being taken away, they don't have a choice but to try to deal with that pain in some other way, whether it's switching medications or trying to replenish your prescription. I mean, there's a lot of conversations that need to be had and a lot of work that needs to be done.
Did you find out who sold him the pill, how he got it? Were they ever charged?
So we worked with law enforcement. He had the information in his phone, but I'm sure, as you know, with Snapchat, you know, the messages disappear. They found the name of the person that was involved, and nothing ever came about. And honestly, that's not something that we pursued. We let law enforcement do their job. And if they ended up catching him, that's fine, but that wasn't anything that was going to bring me any peace. I wasn't looking for justice. I was looking for ways to help other people.
So no one was ever arrested?
Not to our knowledge.
Correct.
I understand what you're saying. There were people arrested in my daughter's case, and people actually went to prison. They killed more than just my daughter. But it did not bring me any peace. It didn't bring her back. I am glad these people were taken off the streets, and a couple of them were really suffering from substance use disorder themselves, and so they needed help. But a couple of them were just dealing for the profit, for greed, and for money. However, even when they're taken off the street, a couple people pop up in their place, right?
Right. Mhm.
And so it's just like a rat on a wheel with this problem that we're having, so fueled by money and greed.
Right. And it doesn't mean that you can stop. You know, you still want them off the street. And my preference would have been for that person to go to prison. But I hear what you're saying about, you know, the people that were dealing had problems themselves, and you don't know what they were going through. And it doesn't make it any easier when there's somebody that's involved in the death of your child. But if they're hooked on something, stuck on something, they're going to do anything that they can to try to get their fix. There's a lot of education that needs to go into addiction, especially when you're talking about something as strong as fentanyl. I feel sorry for these people, and that includes the drug dealers that are on drugs themselves. They have their own story. I think they need to pay for their crime. They need help, but it's a fine line. You know, where do you draw the line? Because anybody that tries drugs and gets hooked on drugs can easily find themselves in that position where they will do anything for it. But it's just a matter of, you know, how you start.
Right. It's true. It's so highly addictive, and people don't really understand substance use disorder as a disease of the brain and what happens to the brain and how this becomes the most important thing to people once they're suffering from it.
Have you lost a loved one to overdose or fentanyl poisoning? I'd like to invite you to share their story on our new Emily's Hope Memorial website called More Than Just a Number. They were our children, siblings, cousins, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, and friends. So much more than just a number. You can submit a memorial today on morethanjustanumber.org. Deric and Kathy are working to raise awareness through their nonprofit, Become Their Voice. They founded the organization after losing their son, wanting to create a place where grieving families could find support. Now they're also focused on educating others about mental health, substance use disorder, and the drug crisis.
You know, we talk about pain into purpose. One of the things that helps you with your grief is finding something that helps fill your cup, that helps do something positive for you, that you can do maybe for yourself, but in the name of your child or the name of your loved one, to give you a sense of purpose. And my passion's always been with the kids. I was a coach for 10 years. I coached high school kids for 6 years, and they got on my nerves, but I love them to death. But I really care about and relate to these kids. So I wanted to do something to help them. And my wife and I, worked on this nonprofit. We developed some presentations, not only for the students, but for the parents. It's been slow going because it's hard to get into the schools initially, but we have started to get into some of the local high schools and share our information and talk to the kids. And we've had some pretty positive responses from them.
And it really is just getting out there and raising awareness. Like we said earlier, when Sebastian passed, we hadn't even heard the word fentanyl. And we still have people. We're in it all the time. And I'm sure, like you think, oh my gosh, doesn't everybody know about fentanyl? Because we talk about it, see it, hear it every day. But there's still so many people that have not even heard it.
Yeah, you're right. The awareness really needs to continue. I feel like I've been doing this for 6 years, and why doesn't everybody know? But they don't. I was just talking to someone from the DEA here this morning, and he was saying, I just don't understand. It's like 2 planes crashing out of the sky every day, the number of deaths that we have, why this isn't getting more attention than it's getting. And I always say it's because of the stigma involved with either using drugs, taking drugs, experimenting with drugs, no matter what it is. It's that drug aspect of it. There's so much stigma around it, is why people don't pay as much attention to it as we need to.
Exactly. As we've moved forward doing some speaking engagements and things like that, and we put things out on social media, the comments, well, not my kid. My kid was a good kid. Just like you said, the stigma that goes with that. Well, our kid was a great kid too, but occasionally there's going to be a poor decision made, a bad decision. We've got mental health. We should all know that coming out of COVID, where the mental health situation is.
I always say even good kids can make a bad decision.
Absolutely.
Occasionally, but they shouldn't have to pay for that with their life.
Right.
Well, we've all made bad decisions, let's be honest. So nobody's perfect. So anybody that wants to judge anybody for making a bad decision, I'm going to call them out on it.
It's interesting being here with parents who have all lost a child in the same way, because when I've gone to other groups or spoken in front of people or whatever it is, I often have parents come up and say to me, I lost a child too, but it wasn't from drugs. In fact, I wrote an entire blog about it because I was like, it doesn't matter how you lost. Child loss is child loss. Why are you telling me that? Are you judging my child? Or you're thinking I'm going to judge your child? I mean, it's just so bizarre to me that people have to clarify, oh, but it wasn't from drugs, like your kid,
Right.
One of the things that we talk to the parents about in the presentation is we go through the different ways. We talk about the stigma, we talk about the drugs, and them putting their own lives in danger as opposed to somebody that was texting and driving, drinking and driving. If they lost their life, well, at least it wasn't the drugs. What is the difference? The stigma around drugs really drives this, and I think that we have difficulty getting into schools because of it too, because they don't want to necessarily have these conversations because then they're admitting that they have a problem. We were contacted by a couple schools specifically because they were having a problem. So I think that eventually, if enough kids are struggling within the school, or if they're having, kids pass away, they might be a little more open to the conversation. But right now, they don't want that in their school district.
Well, we know our kids are dying. We know fentanyl is the number one killer of young people. We know overdoses among teenagers have doubled in a 3-year period. We know it's happening everywhere. I've talked in huge districts and huge theaters, and I've also gone to smaller schools. And even in those smaller schools, they've had 3 overdoses that were revived of their students. They've caught kids with pills and different things like that. Kids are vaping as young as 3rd grade.
Right.
And we have to do more. That's why we started our Emily's Hope K-5 substance use prevention curriculum. And we're having an outpouring of schools that want it. So we have to start talking to kids younger. But that sort of idea, when you talk to mostly middle, high school kids, when I go give a presentation, that's what I do as well. That idea that, oh, we can't talk about it here. We don't want to think it could happen here. It's happening everywhere. And there's no denying it.
Right.
Right. The problem is they're not having the conversation even within the schools. And I'll give you an example. So we spoke at one, and we had a panel afterwards, and we had a medical doctor up there. We had the SRO, the principal, and I think that, I don't know if the superintendent was up there or not, but I specifically asked the SRO if he had given out Narcan before, and he said at least 15 times. And the administration was shocked. So
Very shocked. They had no idea.
They didn't even know their SRO had given out Narcan that many times in their community. So if we can't have a conversation, an open conversation about it, then people, they aren't going to know what's going on. So we have to start with that. People have to be honest.
And having Narcan as a resource is awesome, but it does skew the numbers though too, because we're reviving people. We're not losing people. So I think we're seeing a decline in numbers, but we're still seeing an uptick in use.
Right. I think you're correct about that. They've said that 3% drop in the number of deaths for last year really has to do with the distribution of Narcan, which we're doing a ton of at Emily's Hope. It's important to save lives, but it's also important to understand that the problem isn't going away just because we're doing a better job of stopping people from dying.
Correct.
Right.
They're still left with the addiction if they're to that point.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's so important to get people help after they have overdosed and survived. And we are doing everything we can to do that as well. There are different things starting across the country with the use of this opioid settlement money to try to get people help if they're willing, if receptive to it. That's a big part of it as well. But I want to ask you a question about talking to kids, because I do it all the time, mostly in the spring and the fall, though, sometimes in the winter, but mostly in the spring and the fall. And I tell them Emily's story, and I go back there. Like, I just made you go back to your son's death when we were talking about it, because I think it's so important that people understand, get the picture of what happened and understand the depths of your pain. And I hate to do that because I really do understand how re-traumatizing it is. And I think a lot about myself when I'm talking to kids. I re-traumatize myself every time I do it. And I think, but I need to do it because these kids need to hear it. They see a girl like Emily, they see her picture, they would see a kid like Sebastian and think, that can't happen to somebody like that. That person has everything going for them. That can't happen to them. But it can happen to anybody in any family. But getting back to my question, do you feel like you're re-traumatizing yourselves when you talk about it? Do you think it's a healthy thing to do?
For me, it is. I forced myself to do it. I remember an interview that they did with Billy Bob Thornton, and he talked about his brother passing away. And he talked about the pain that he lived with and that he endured. And he said, if I have to be 50% happy and 50% sad all the time, I'm going to do it because he was worth it. And I agree with that.
I like that.
That's how I am. In my presentations, I have 3 videos of kids in there. They're very short, but they show their personalities. They're different kids from different demographics. One of them is our son. And it really displays their personality. And at the end, it shows the date that they died, and it shows their urn. And the kids are a little taken back because I don't warn them, and at the end I say that was my son. And then we show the other 2 kids, and one of the gals says, I just want to raise awareness, Mom. And she didn't realize how prophetic that was. She is raising awareness. She's in our presentations, and she's in a lot of other things across the country. But it's still difficult for me. And I have gone through, not just practice, but gone through the presentations over and over and over again. So when I give them, I still get a little emotional. I still get a little choked up. And for a second, once in a while, I have to just bite my tongue, and come to grips with things, and then I can continue. But yes, it is a little traumatizing to watch those.
How about you, Kathy?
Absolutely. I think having the nonprofit, going out and speaking, I know it's therapeutic for Deric. I don't find it to be therapeutic, to be honest with you, at all. There was so much more to Sebastian than fentanyl. And it just seemed like for so long, every time Sebastian's name was brought up, it was drugs, it's fentanyl. And I just got to the point where I just wanted to stop talking about that because I want to talk about Sebastian. I want to talk about all the good things, the fun things, not just fentanyl.
I get that. When in my presentations, I say, I don't want my daughter to be remembered for just how she died, for what killed her.
Right.
I want her to be remembered as a whole person and all these amazing things that she did and who she was. And I do think because we're being so public about it, that is what people really think about when they think about our kids is fentanyl.
Yes.
But it is important to talk about Sebastian. That's why I asked you right off the bat about him, because I want people to know who he was, to have an idea of who he was. And
Yeah.
But in the end, the people that it truly matters to know who he was.
Right. That's so true. And you were also invited to the State of the Union.
Yes.
Tell me about that. How did that come about? And what was that like?
I've done a couple of speaking engagements with Congressman Zach Nunn, and I got a call out of the blue. I didn't realize that it was him directly, but I had a voicemail to call back, and I thought I was going to talk to his aide. And he actually jumped on the phone and said, hey, we'd like to take you out here if you guys are available. So we jumped at the chance. Now, little did we know at the time that it was between us and Caitlin Clark. And I think she was busy with basketball. So
Who can compete with Caitlin Clark? Nobody.
Right.
Yeah.
we ended up getting the gig. But I'm not a big history buff, but it was an amazing experience. Absolutely amazing. And he was our personal tour guide, and it was amazing.
Do you feel like you got through to somebody about fentanyl? Do you think they're doing enough in Washington, D.C.?
No, not Washington, D.C. No. But I think that here in Iowa, I think Congressman Nunn for sure has taken a step forward on it. He speaks about it a lot and quite frequently. We've done a few things with the governor as well. She's just got a lot on her plate. She's got a lot of hot topics, I'm sure, but I think more needs to be done. Washington, D.C. as a whole is not doing anything, in my opinion.
Well, they have put billions of dollars into this issue and are trying to stop the cartels where the money is. So the Department of Treasury is issuing sanctions and things like that. But clearly not enough, or we wouldn't continue to see these deaths. And I think it's going to take everybody in this nation and everybody from all sectors, business, private sector, government, coming together on this issue to really protect our kids.
Agreed.
I do agree, but there's a lot of money involved, and greed gets a handle on people. And I think we're battling something that we can hope to limit. We can curb it a bit, but I think it's going to be a long road ahead.
It's a complicated issue because you're dealing with substance use disorder, you're dealing with the money, the greed, the cartels, China, all of it, right? It's a complicated issue. And it's really impacted the United States the most out of anywhere in the world. It's starting to show up more in other countries, but not nearly as much as what we've seen. And there is no quick, easy, simple solution. And I think that's what makes it so hard, because we are all trying to save other people's kids now. Our children are gone.
Right.
And the whole reason for this podcast is to try to raise awareness and save other people's kids.
And that's where maybe we can't control the supply, but we need to control the demand. The mental health piece of it really needs to be talked about. We talk about that quite a bit. We're getting into jargon that people talk about all the time that came through COVID, self-care, mental health, but it truly is the reason why people seek to numb out or to put a Band-Aid on a life situation temporarily. We did a presentation at a high school and were part of a several-day self-care, and they were talking with the kids on alternative ways to numb out or zone or self-care, whatever you want to call it. But they were talking about yoga and exercise and journaling, and just what a great way and a great thing for a high school to focus on. The kids opened up, they had open discussions. I think if more schools would implement that, and get more counselors on staff and things like that, I think it would be a step in the right direction for sure.
I love that because that's all in our curriculum as well, trying to teach kids ways to cope with their emotions and pressures because we have to cover the whole child. We can't just talk about one area. We got to talk about their brains. We got to talk about their bodies and protecting that, but also their emotions and the pressures and everything that they're under.
We have to let them know that it's normal and it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate all the work you're doing. Thank you for talking to the students. Thank you for talking to me. Thank you for sharing Sebastian with us. And it has been just a pleasure to get to know you and to get to know your story.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for taking the time to learn more about one of the most pressing issues facing our nation, the fentanyl crisis. Do you have an idea for a Grieving Out Loud episode? We'd love to hear it. You can find my contact information in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wannenberg King and Michael Guerin. Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K-12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emilyshopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe.